I've looked into the numbers of over 7,800 high-level jiu-jitsu matches that ended in a finish, and guess what? Only 1.3% of them were by the Omoplata submission. That's surprising because the Omoplata is one of the first fundamental submissions people learn in jiu-jitsu. But how often do you actually see it tap people out, especially at the highest levels? In this video, we're going to dive into the stats, break down why it's so hard to finish, but also explore some of its strengths, like chaining into sweeps and other submissions. And I'll reveal the one key detail that makes or breaks whether an Omoplata submission is successful. And if you don't already know me, my name's Sean. I'm a BJJ black belt and a founder of the BJJ education app, Digitsu, which if you wanted to check out, I put a link in the description with some free instructional content. All right, so one thing I really want to make clear from the beginning here is that I really don't think the Omoplata sucks. No, seriously, the Omoplata has some real strengths, but before we get into that, let's go more into the numbers to see if we can figure out what's going on. So if we take a look at our data here and we look at the submissions that ended matches, we see here out of around 7,800 submissions, about 1.3% or 102 were by the Omoplata. So this is obviously very low, but it's especially low when we compare it to other classic submissions like the armbar at 19%, chokes from the back and rear naked choke, each adding up to about 25%, and even the triangle choke at 7.5%. One of the reasons for this is that armbars can easily be set up for more dominant positions like mount, side control, and the back. And of course, our back chokes and our rear naked chokes also come from the dominant back position. Meanwhile, there are fewer setups for the Omoplata from side control and mount. So the Omoplata is primarily a guard technique. So once we consider that, it can help explain why the percentage is so low. Although yet, even still, Omoplata finishes are much less common than the traditional front triangle choke, which is often also set up from forms of guard. So far, the numbers we've been looking at have been a mix of both gi and no gi matchups. But if we take just a look at just gi matches only, something interesting happens. Our percentage of Omoplata jumps from 1.3% to 1.7%, or 89 submissions out of 5,000. But then if we take a look at just no gi matches, we see then that the percentages drop all the way down to 0.5%, or 13 submissions out of 2,700 submissions. So clearly it looks like Omoplata finishes are much less common in no gi. And one of the obvious major reasons to explain this is the lack of control you have in no gi compared to gi, which we'll get into more detail about later in this video. And while the numbers back up our claim, we're definitely not the only ones who've made this observation.
Omoplata, I think D.
D tier.
For no gi, I think D. I think it's a lot more effective in the gi. It can still be effective in no gi, but no gi, I think it's D tier.
By the way, if you're curious what I've been using so far in this video to get all these stats and insights, I've just launched a free stats feature, which you can use now on Digitsu. In addition to the submission breakdowns we went over in this video, it also includes stat leaderboards for things like total matches and submission percentages. You can go into individual athletes to see breakdowns of their stats, broken down by wins, losses, including their competition history, which you can then search through. And you can also go into individual events to see stat breakdowns and matchup history as well. It's still early and I've been busy coding to add new features and refine the data, but I already think it's pretty useful. If you want to check it out, I'll be sure to include a link in the description below. And there's also a link on the website on Digitsu in the header. So far in this video, all the numbers we've been talking about are related to the frequency or the number of successful submissions. Another important thing to consider when evaluating technique is how often it is successful when attempted, or in other words, how effective it is. Like for example, how often or what percent of the time do Omoplata submission attempts actually lead to your opponent tapping?
They've done studies, 60% of the time it works every time.
And to answer this question, there's another data set compiled using multiple sources by Justin Tagieff. And if you happen to watch this, Justin, forgive me if I pronounced your name wrong. One of the things he found in his analysis was that the Omoplata was one of the least successful submissions with a 12% success rate, or 4 successful out of 33 attempts. For comparison here, the most effective submission he had in his data was the collar choke, which included multiple different forms, but it was about 76% here, or for 75 out of 99 attempts. And I think the reason for this is that the Omoplata requires a number of steps along the way to secure the submission. First, you have to get angle on your opponent, and you can use your legs to maintain that position while at the same time using different methods of control to break down their posture. There are a number of different variations and configurations of your grips you can use to control your opponent here, but from now on, I'm going to refer to this stage as the Omoplata position. To transition from the position to the submission requires in either order sitting up and breaking your opponent down before leaning forward and creating space to finish the shoulder lock. This is a similar finishing mechanic as the Kimura, except using your legs. And it's often in this transition from the position to the submission that many of the escapes and defenses come into play. One common escape is that they hop over to the other side if they can just time it just right, or if they catch the attacker with no control over their legs or hips. There are also many other escapes and defenses, like where they pin your hips down with their knee, kind of like a reverse knee on belly, which they can then use to square back up and slip their elbow. And that's not to mention escapes where they forward roll or roll underneath to escape the position. These rolls can be hard to stop because you have to have some form of control of their leg, hips, or waist to block the roll. Now let's go back into our data and see who's pulled off the most Omoplata submissions successfully and see if they can teach us something about dealing with all these counters. And one person who really stands out with successful Omoplata submissions at black belt is Clark Gracie. You may know him from that photogenic jiu-jitsu guy meme where sure enough, he was attacking the Omoplata. Currently, based on the data, he has 12 Omoplata submissions logged, but this data isn't comprehensive, so he probably has many more. And after watching matches of Clark Gracie and others where the Omoplata was successful, what often determines if you'll be successful or not is whether you have some form of control of their upper body. Some ways you can control this is by connecting your hands around their far side arm under the armpit, controlling their far side lapel, or using a seatbelt grip around the back. As soon as you have this form of control, your opponent's options to escape are severely limited. It's much more easy for you to break them down and finish a submission. And even if they do manage to roll at this stage, if you maintain your connection, you can still maintain the position and get the finish, even if they now end up in a seated position and they're on their butt. To show you what I'm talking about here, I have a match with Clark Gracie. He's here on the white gi. What he's gonna do here is gonna establish his grips. He's gonna pull guard. He's gonna retain his guard. He often likes to get to Omoplata using inversions. We're not gonna focus too much on entries to Omoplata in this video, but you can see here he inverts. He has sleeve control right here and he goes right to the Omoplata. Notice right there how he blocked that jump over. His opponent immediately went to jump over in the position and he used his arm there to block that. He actually blocked this leg here, but then he switched over to the near side leg when he can grab it. So one important detail I wanted to point out is that Clark Gracie likes to use a grip on the lapel to control his opponent's posture, but also to prevent them from escaping the shoulder. You can see how he has a grip here actually between the legs of the lock here, and he just got it tighter there. Meanwhile, his opponent's grabbing his own leg to prevent his arm from being brought around his back, while Clark's controlling the belt, which controls the hip on this side, to prevent the hop over. And now his opponent's going to put that knee down like we talked about there, creating that like reverse knee on belly position right there. So this makes it difficult then for, Clark obviously to sit up to finish Omoplata, but he extends the leg out there to get that off. At the same time, he relocks his triangle, and now he's going to sit up. Now he took the hand off the lapel and he brings the arm around the back. At the same time, he's using that hand to break grips. He's probably going to reestablish his lapel grip again here as well. And these sequences keep happening here. Now again, Clark has the lapel. His opponent's trying to put that knee on again as Clark sits up, goes for the Omoplata, but the knee comes in, re-triangles his legs, establishes the lapel. And the thing I want to point out here, this sequence and these defenses the opponent keeps using, they're very tiring, especially, as he clears that knee again using his hand. Notice how his opponent, he's using a lot of endurance in his lower back. He's not in great posture, just fending off these attempts to finish over and over again. And we're going to skip ahead a couple of minutes and they're still fighting in this position here. So Clark has the lapel grip. His opponent keeps trying to put that knee on his belly there. Clark keeps clearing it. And you can see this is really, really fatiguing for his opponent. He's in a very uncomfortable posture here. And eventually, I think what happened there, his opponent just needed a break after just fighting in that position for like 3 or 4 minutes. And it's at this point, I just wanted to point out something about that. There's a reason why his opponent was fighting from those positions. Like, sure, he could have attempted one of the rolling escapes, but the problem with those is that often you end up in a worse position, especially in gi. And this is a point system here. So if his opponent went for one of those rolls, ended up on bottom, even if he got guard back, that would have been 2 points and a sweep. But now we're further along, and now we're more into the traditional Omoplata submission position. And Clark has that grip now over the back. I'm not sure if he has far side lapel here, but this is a much more dangerous situation for his opponent. And notice now he's going to go over for the roll. And if Clark doesn't have the far side lapel yet, it's often in that roll that it becomes available here. So he's going to go across, and notice now Clark has that far side lapel here. And I really love this next sequence here. What you're going to see here is opponent's going to be in a seated position here. Clark's going to go for the Omoplata. Then his opponent's going to build back up to his knees. Gets to his knees here, and then again he's going to go for that forward roll, but Clark's going to stay on him. Now that he has that far side lapel grip, it's very easy to now to follow as opponent continues to roll through here. So his opponent rolls, he follows, builds back to his knees, rolls, he follows. And now from here you can see how the arm's really in that position there. And he scoots out, he makes space. Notice how Clark scoots out to make space to finish the Omoplata. And he gets the tap there. So one really interesting thing I came across when I was making this video, I don't have data on this yet, but one thing I noticed is that most of the submission finishes actually came from this position instead of the conventional finishing position. And if I were to speculate why, I would say that's because in this position, they can't roll, they can't posture up. And if they are able to go back to their knees and then roll again, they're just going to end up in this position again if the person has enough control over them. I mean, I'm curious what you think. Let me know down in the comments. Is this a better position to finish from than the traditional sit-up Omoplata?
What was that? No way! Yes!
So I have another match here with Clark Gracie. He's here in the white gi again. And I just want to go over quick because there's a couple of good things to point out in this video. He pulls guard again. He's going to use that sleeve grip and he's going to invert and set up the Omoplata using a scoop grip on the leg there. He has Omoplata lock, and his opponent's gonna do something really annoying. He's gonna lock his legs over, you know, like right here. So it's obviously it's impossible now for Clark to sit up. But the thing I wanted to point out here in this position is Clark's grips. Now, first he's trying to like kind of, you know, break the legs here. But the really interesting thing when we're in this spot is how Clark controls it. He's gonna use that lapel grip again, like what we talked about. And the reason why he controls the lapel, in this case, you know, obviously he doesn't have to worry about his opponent posturing up, but it's that lapel grip that controls his opponent's shoulder. And if you can control the shoulder, then they're not going to slip the elbow. And the key to maintaining the Omoplata and the key to escaping is whether that elbow is in the lock or not. So, you know, his opponent's trying to pull the lapel away. He's trying to get that elbow out. So eventually Clark's going to use that lapel grip and he's going to let go of it as he goes to open the legs here. Brings it across, and immediately as he clears that off his knee, he's going to sit up right into the Omoplata. Once you are able to establish this grip over their belt line, you have a much stronger connection, so you're much more likely to end up in a more dominant position or finish them. And it's often when they roll from this position that you see people upgrade their grips to one of the other controls we talked about. Like for instance here, this is where Clark's going to switch and transition to get that far side lapel grip we talked about. Right here. And from here now, he's actually going to finish him with a collar choke instead of a traditional Omoplata finish. And I just wanted to point out it ended up again in a similar position to before, where that position where their opponent is almost seated, kind of like a crucifix, instead of the traditional Omoplata finish. So one thing is clear by now, Clark relies heavily on the gi to control the position and work his way towards a submission. So clearly the Omoplata can be effective in gi.
Omoplata, for the gi, I would argue that it's great up the top, but look, for a submission, for sweeping, great. In the gi, great.
But it's just not as effective in no-gi. You don't have those lapel grips that Clark was using, you know, to control their shoulder, to control their posture, nor do you have pant grips to prevent rolls, to prevent step overs, to break them down and build yourself up. That's not to mention there can be less friction in no-gi, especially when competitors get sweatier. It can be much more easy for them to slip the elbow and escape the Omoplata. That being said, it's not impossible, and they do happen in no-gi, as you still have access to the over-the-back waist grip, and you still have access to forms of upper body control, like connecting your hands under the far side armpit or with a seatbelt grip, which are strong ways to stay attached to your opponent and get the finish in no-gi. So one last Omoplata sequence here with Clark Gracie. He's here on the bottom. He's going to set up the Omoplata. Notice how he controls the legs, like we talked about, to prevent step overs. His opponent tries to put the knee on. He clears that. He gets that waist grip. He gets that far side lapel. Goes for a traditional finish. Re-rolls. He's on his opponent's back. And this time again, just like before, he's not going to finish with the Omoplata, but he's actually going to finish with a collar choke. So seeing matches like this, and when making this video and looking at the data, it leads me to a theory to think that the Omoplata position and even Omoplata submission attempts often don't lead to the Omoplata submission. But that doesn't mean the Omoplata isn't good, because it often leads to other more dominant positions and other submissions. The Omoplata submission is difficult to finish, but here's the thing, the initial steps of getting to the Omoplata position are much easier. If you're able to maintain control over your opponent's elbow, they won't be able to escape, and many of the escapes they can go for actually end up bringing them to even worse positions. You can use the initial Omoplata position to increase your control over your opponent and attack, like with sweeps to get on top, transitions to the back, triangles, K-guard attacks, toe holds, choi bars, and much more. Maybe the right way to think of the Omoplata position is actually the Omoplata guard, which has available to it the Omoplata submission as one of its options. And it works just like many other forms of guard. Say you have a strong collar sleeve guard or spider guard. You're negating their offense and they have to escape your guard or break your control to launch into their guard pass. And just like these guards, when your opponent is fighting from these positions, they're often expending more energy to defend them than you are expending to maintain them. And even when we do transition to the Omoplata submission, the further along you are with your progression, the more likely your failed Omoplata will lead directly to a better position or another attack. Compare this to, say, the conventional triangle, where often when this fails from guard, you're immediately on the defensive, trying to retain your guard against your opponent. So while triangles and arm bars from guard can be thought of as high risk, high reward, going for the Omoplata can be thought of as lower risk, as your guard won't be completely compromised as often when you go for the attack. And even in no-gi, where the Omoplata is less effective because you have less control, it can still be used to set up other attacks. Like for instance, when you go for upper body threats of an Omoplata, they posture up. It might give you opportunities then to attack the legs with, say, K-guard. And before I created this video, I put up a poll to see if people thought the Omoplata was overrated, and most people seem to think it was. Also, some of the comments got really personal, and this is something I wasn't expecting.
Overrated. Pretty boy. A bitch.
So anyway, I'm curious at this point, what do you think about the Omoplata? Please let me know down in the comments. Personally, I think the Omoplata is difficult to finish, especially against opponents that are about the same skill level as you. But because of its strength as a guard and as a position and the other options available to it, I definitely think it's appropriate to be taught to beginners, especially in the gi. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Thank you for watching.